We tend to view the American Revolution through the lens of oil paintings and speeches. But in the winter of 1777, Washington's army was literally barefoot in the snow, outnumbered, unpaid, and days away from total disappearance. Survival didn't get any easier after the British surrendered. The first version of the American government, the Articles of Confederation, left the states acting like 13 tiny separate countries. The central government couldn't tax, pay debts, or enforce laws. That systemic rot was exposed in 1786 when broke veterans in Massachusetts marched on a federal armory. Shays' Rebellion proved the new country was already on the verge of collapse. The founders realized that a few minor fixes wouldn't save the experiment. They locked themselves in a Philadelphia room and scrapped the entire system in order to write the Constitution, replacing the failed Confederation with a powerful federal government. This established a pattern that would define the next 250 years. American progress moves through a repeating loop. First, a massive expansion, then total systemic failure, and a subsequent rebuild that changes the country's trajectory. By the mid-1800s, the country hit its most significant design flaw, a union built on the promise of freedom that still relied on the machinery of slavery. The physical toll of the resulting Civil War was staggering. This wasn't a conflict fought on distant shores. 620,000 Americans died in their own farm towns, leaving landscapes across the South in literal ruins. In the middle of this carnage, the government issued a massive structural change. The Emancipation Proclamation turned the war into a fight to end slavery, legally removing the institution that had been tearing the country apart since its birth. But Reconstruction was messy and incomplete. A backroom political deal in 1876 pulled federal troops out of the South, abandoning millions of newly freed citizens to decades of Jim Crow laws and state-sanctioned segregation. Despite these failures, the war forced a refounding of the nation. The original fragile Union of States died at Appomattox, and a more powerful, centralized nation was built in place. By the 1920s, the country was riding a massive economic expansion. Mass production and a soaring stock market created an illusion that the growth would never stop. Then, the entire financial system vanished almost overnight. By 1933, 1 out of every 4 American workers was jobless, and banks were failing by the thousands, wiping out the life savings of millions of families. The collapse became an apocalypse when the Dust Bowl hit the Great Plains. Massive dust storms turned the sky black, blotting out the sun and forcing families to abandon their homes with only what they could carry. This total failure triggered a physical rewiring of the nation. In a few years, the government built the dams, bridges, and parks that still define the American landscape today, while creating the first modern social safety net. The Depression didn't just pass, it leveled the previous system, making room for the infrastructure and economic rules that would power the country for the rest of the century. The 1960s showed just how tightly these cycles of highs and lows could compress. Within a single decade, the country reached its most agonizing depths and its most significant technological height. On the evening news, the country watched a relentless stream of tragedy. News of political assassinations saw burning American cities and casualties of the Vietnam War. To many watching at home, it felt like the social fabric was coming apart. Yet, in the middle of that same domestic chaos, a human being stepped onto the moon. It was a peak of engineering and ambition that seemed impossible yet in the state of the country below. This was achieved using computers weaker than a modern calculator, even as the nation's political and social systems were failing their own stress tests. These two extremes, the lunar landing and the social unrest, happened in the same window. It shows a country capable of reaching further into the future, even as its current systems are under the greatest possible strain. The cycle has continued into our own time, from the shock of September 11th to the near collapse of the global financial system in 2008. We have lived through modern versions of these national failures. When these breaks happen, we tend to believe we've reached a final, permanent end. We celebrate the periods of growth, but treat the periods of collapse as if the country has no mechanism for recovery. But the history of the last 250 years suggests that these failures often clear the path for the next phase of development. They reveal exactly what is broken and force a level of change that wouldn't happen during the good times. The recovery is the most consistent feature of this timeline. Whether it's writing a new constitution or building a new economy, the response to a break has historically been to build something more resilient. The line from those starving soldiers in the snow to a flag on the moon isn't a story of constant winning. It's a story of repeated recoveries. Every time the country breaks, it has used the debris to build something that reaches further.